Greetings to everyone, my name is Syroyid, and in today's video I'll be featuring one of my students' work. Specifically, we'll be looking at 6 pieces written by Elijah Diaz, who is a teenage composer, a student of piano, and in this case this is the work that we can see from his first year of composition studies. The pieces are minuets that are basically featuring what we can call period composition based on the Baroque style, maybe the galant style of the early 18th century. And we will also see some features that probably point to more modern styles that are particularly showing maybe a romantic taste in the last of the 6 minuets. So what I'll do in the video is a presentation of these pieces, and I'll try to explain their unique features, and we'll do a little analysis of each of them. So let's start with minuet number 1. Alright, so this little 16-bar minuet is what we can see as a good example of a minuet that starts with one structure that's in the main key. In this case, we're in D major. And from D major, we are moving towards some modulations, specifically to B minor, which is the relative minor key. And within this structure, the first section can be seen as a sentence. So I'll be labeling the basic idea here, which is presented at the beginning. Maybe we can give it actually a red color. So that's the basic idea. That's basically repeated again with a variation. And then we have a contrasting idea. So the contrasting idea is based around the same similar concept, but mostly it's a continuation that features a cadence. So that's the repetition of basic idea. And then we have the continuation. That would be what we call a sentence. So this is a sentence that's 8 bars long, and it's in the non-modulation. It doesn't modulate, so it's non-modulatory. It features D major at the beginning, and it goes to the dominant. So let's analyze the harmony. Harmonically, we have the tonic, and here we go to the dominant. And in the second case, we're seeing probably the tonic, the predominant, the dominant, and the tonic. So that would be a little bit the tonal plan of the piece. It's interesting to notice that here we're seeing this sort of harmony, which could be understood either as a dominant or an E minor chord. You could see it as an A major. And here we're seeing also this suspended inversion, which is kind of a little bit unusual. You could be going also for other routes. But definitely what we can see as direction in the bass is how we're moving from D to A, which gives a lot of linear motion. And then how we're continuing from F sharp, G, A, D. That gives a lot of clarity to the musical discourse. And that line that's basically ascending and then descending is having its counterpart with the contrary motion that's primarily descending in the top line. So maybe that would be the best image of that contrary motion. Likewise, at the beginning, we can see contrary motion as the melody is descending from F to this D, right? So those would be the pillars of that. Now, in terms of elements, we can clearly see that there are two contrasting ingredients here. So one of them is this staccato element. So I'll give it a yellow color. And basically it's moving around different parts. So let's make it really bright. Here we can see the staccato in the left hand. Now it's on the top, right? And then it develops further with the bass. So that element of the 3 notes with staccato is featured prominently at various parts of the minuet. Then the other element, which is this rhythm that has the stress on the last note, is also becoming a very important cell, because if you look at the beginning of the second phrase, we can see that it features a similar presentation. I think this was the hue. Yeah, that's the rhythm we're using. So we have here this similar idea, but now it's basically used as a progression. So we're moving from D major, that's D major tonic. Now we are modulating here to B minor, which is relative, and that's the dominant that goes to the tonic. And then we're going back to D major with the dominant, right? And after that, well, basically this is the cadential process. So it has the predominant, the dominant, a little tonic here that's primarily non-functional. And then we have a little subdominant. And finally, this is the dominant that goes to the tonic. So that's kind of the cadence. We have the dominant established here, which is basically prolongated. And this little prolongation makes the dominant sound longer, but the entire cadence maybe, well, can be seen as this full sentence, as this full phrase at the end. So that would be the cadence. Right, and now with the blue color, we can highlight this as being the continuation. So the difference between the first and the second phrase is that, well, the first sentence didn't have a sequence that was modulating, but in this case, the sentence has a modulation, or a small, short, brief modulation to the relative minor. Right, so that's basically how it's organized. Now, it's also important to notice that what makes this minuet really work is the outline, or in the direction that we have in the outer voices. So generally speaking, if you want to make a minuet sound good, you have to really pay close attention to what is the counterpoint that's happening on the strong beats. So at the beginning, we have D and F sharp, which goes to G and E. Here's where we have a little bit of a weaker counterpoint, which is A and D, and that's supposed to go probably to C sharp. Right, so I would play it with the C sharp. Right, it seems to make also a lot of sense, but probably that E included here is meant to be breaking the pattern. So that's why we find this fifth that's basically breaking the pattern and making it stronger. I remember back then actually suggesting to Elijah the substitution of that note for C sharp, but he really liked the melody ending up with that upper motion, and here we have that strong fifth at there. It's a little bit hollow, and from the counterpoint point of view, it would make more sense to think of this as a suspension of the fourth going to the third. Now we have then a continuation, which also features a very strong counterpoint. You have D, B, G, and F. So if I just play the downbeats of each bar, I get already a quite solid counterpoint. Right, and the rest is basically fillers. So we have passing tones that are going like scales, up and down in this case. We get arpeggios, we have also appoggiaturas, so all of these are different techniques. Let's kind of write them down so we have a better understanding. So the first technique is arpeggios, right? That's kind of very direct. Here we have passing tones, right? Then we have here a good example of a neighbor tone, NT, neighbor tone. which is featuring afterwards passing tones. And in this case, well, the scales are very prominent. So we have scales, which are passing tones, and arpeggios. And apart from these elements, also we have an octave leap. That's another very good technique, octave leap. And then these little fillers, which are like a double neighbor tone or passing tone, because you go from D back to D, like that. Right, so octave leap, again, scales, octave leaps, it's all quite balanced and it's based around these concepts. It can easily pass us some of the minuets that we find in the little book by that was written by Bach and also compiled by Bach from other composers for his sons. But of course, well, it always requires a really big mastery in order to get absolutely the right style. So this is a good approach for this first minuet. Let's look at the characteristics of the second minuet. So I'll do the same. I'll just start playing it, and then we'll start with analysis. So minuet number 2 in G major. Right, so this little minuet features one of the elements of the rhythms that are innovative. It's a 3/2, which is usually also associated with what we call a canary. A canary is a sort of Baroque dance. You can Google it and also find more information on the internet about it. But also sometimes written as canary, like this, which was popular in the Baroque, and it kind of also could be seen as a little variation within the gig that features this sort of 3/2 rhythm. Now, in this case, specifically, well, the minuet is really distinct because it doesn't feature the sentence structure, which we have this basic idea repeated and then a continuation, but we have here a period structure. So let's see how it differs. We've got first this opening idea, which is repeated later on. So this is the opening idea. And here we have the repetition of the opening idea, or restatement of opening idea. And then we have a contrasting idea that firstly it appears to be here, and then we get a closing idea that's basically creating a closure or cadence. So this is the cadential idea, and that's the contrasting idea. Usually when you have this form is what we usually label as a period. Now the difference between the first minuet and this one is that we do have a minuet with a modulation. So we start on G major, which is the main key, and we end on D major, which is the dominant of G major. Right, this is a very good example of movement, and also it's done with this period structure, which is featuring the opening idea, the contrasting idea, the opening idea repeated, and then the closing idea. Right, each of them being basically 2 bars long. Now, in order to connect, and this is the interesting element, so I'll put it in yellow, we have this rhythm. So that rhythm is basically all across the piece. It's, well, has different variations. That's one of them. I'll feature the other one. The other variation we can give a purple color, and is this rhythm. So that's basically present here. And if you may, I also can highlight it here at the beginning, because after all, that's also a sense of dotted rhythm. So all across the entire piece, we get to have this sort of 2. right? It can be easily seen also as a 6/8. And then in the second part, we do get this rhythm again. So let me highlight it. And then we have here this yellow rhythm. So that would be the purple one. And then we have the yellow with the dotted quarter notes. All right, so that would be pretty much the motivic logic behind it. So let's continue analyzing the first half of the minuet before we move to the second one. In this case, we also find a 2-case change. So the first one is meant to be a return back to original key. We'll see how that's done. And the second one is a cadence on the dominant. Okay, so we're basically staying there on the dominant. All right, let's see harmonically what's happening here, because this is much more sophisticated as we have a modulation. So we start in the tonic of G major, we move to the dominant here, and back to the tonic. This dominant can be seen not as a cadence, but as a prolongation. So all in all, we can say that the entire first line is a prolongation of the tonic. Now, the prolongation of the tonic changes here as we move to the dominant of the dominant, which is basically the dominant of D major. And then we establish the dominant or the tonic of D major, right? And now, once that's achieved, you can notice that there is a discrepancy between accidentals. So here we find first C sharp, then we see C natural. So these are very different functions. That one is the leading tone. And as the leading tone, it has to go to the tonic. Whereas the C natural is the seventh, and it basically features a different function, is the dominant seventh, and it has to resolve to the third, right? So we have the C that would resolve to, through descending motion, back to the tonic. So these are very different functions, and that's basically how, after presenting a C sharp, you can return back to G major through this C natural. Right, that can be achieved through this process. Now, motivically, also this piece is much more coherent, because if we look at both hands, we can see how, well, Elijah is being more careful with the motivic coherence of the piece. We can see how the motive of the third is being presented in different ways, also here by augmentation. Right. And also we can see these instances of that motif of three notes moving up and down. So basically, well, that's what we're seeing here. Now, also there is a reference to that motif here. In the second phrase, we get to have some progressions. So this is a sequential passage, where we have a sequence that's basically starting in one key, and then it moves to another, or at least that seems to be the gist of it. So we start here, and we go to a different key. What is harmonically happening here? It's just tonic and dominant. So we have first the dominant that moves to the tonic, and then again the dominant that moves to the tonic. But the keys are different. The first time it's the key of G major. And you might be wondering, how do we get back to G major? Well, because from the context, we can see that the C is back to natural. And then here we have A minor. And what is A minor? Is the predominant function. It's being used as a predominant because after that we can see a good feature of the dominant going to the tonic, again dominant, and then tonic. So that's basically the final cadence, which we can highlight here as a perfect authentic cadence. Right, so that's in G major. Good. Now, motivically, that coherence of the three notes, I think, is remarkable. So we can highlight it with a pink. You have these three notes that move up in different ways. So it's presented like that. You have it moving up, down, 3 notes here. And clearly, well, that gives a much higher quality coherence to the piece. So whenever you're presenting your music with some sort of motif that unites or connects the notes, well, you get something quite strong motivically. Now, there are measures, also it's worth noting, that do not have that dotted rhythm. So here we have, for instance, these 2 bars that really sound like a 3/4 minuet. And after this, I think, well, we pretty much analyzed the piece. So let me play it once more. I didn't actually do that with the first one, but I would like to perform it now that we have the analysis on the screen. All right, we're moving forward. So now we have the minuet in B minor. This is the first one that's in a minor key. And as we can see, well, it features also a slower tempo. So first thing I'll do is I'll play it. All right, so this minuet is much more expressive, as we can see, also slightly longer in length due to the tempo, and it features a more expressive language. So let's start. We have here B minor, which is the main key, and as we can see, the final cadence is in the key of D major, and is basically achieved with this predominant chord that goes to the dominant and then tonic. So it's a very elegant cadential gesture with appoggiaturas, right? And in the middle, what we can see is that, well, this would be characterized most likely as a sentence, where we have opening idea that's basically continued with some contrasting material. Then we have a continuation that's basically the cadential element. So that would be the antecedent, and that would be the consequent. In this case, we don't see the exact repetition of the opening idea in bars 3 and 4, which is also another way of doing a sentence. And in this case, well, what we'll see is just this sort of call and response in this antecedent and consequent manner. So this would be a sentence that has a modulation. With a modulation, to the relative major key. In the second half, although we can see some similar structure, it can also be viewed as a sentence. So in this case, it's a sentence that returns back to the tonic. So I'll put it with lines. We have the red line, that's basically the first opening idea, and then the contrasting consequent, that's basically closing. All right, so now that we've seen this, let's try to explain what's happening here at a smaller scale. As we can see already, it doesn't start with a perfect cadence, which is also quite remarkable. So we have a tonic, but right from the beginning, that tonic is being transformed into what can be seen as a small modulation to the third degree. So it's the dominant of the third degree, and then we have the third degree. What is the third degree? Is the relative major. So that's a very expressive gesture. If we're seeing that's the chord of B minor, right? So we have B minor with the tonic, right? That's the root, third and fifth. And now this B minor becomes an A major chord that goes to D major. So basically we have, right, that chord progression, which from the key of D major can be seen directly as a 6, 5, 1. And that's basically how I would argue that this is working. So that's D major. Now, after that, we can see that in the second half, it's clearly a perfect example of a return back to the tonic. So if in the first half, we're sounding more as D major, in the second one, it's clearly B minor. So we start with this E minor chord that goes to B minor tonic, the dominant, and then back to tonic. So it's this subdominant or predominant, tonic, dominant, or you could even connect all of that as a long second degree, which would be the perfect example of a cadential gesture, right? So we have the predominant, the dominant, and the tonic, right? I wanted to put that with some other color so we don't confuse the blue with the red color. So I'll put it with this black. Good. Now, in terms of motifs, again, the motif of the third is very prominent, and I think this is a good element that connects both minuets, but they're very different in nature because the previous one was really joyful and fast, whereas this one is really expressive and slow. But in essence, both share the same motif, which is this motif of the three notes, here with a new rhythmic innovation, which is the presence of triplets. I highly encourage students to include more of these because they are giving a much more rich harmonic and rhythmic context. So once we have that, we can see that the motif of the three notes going down is featured heavily there. And the other one is the motif of the neighbor tone. So the motif of the neighbor tone, which can receive this green color, is this sort of D, C, D, which is also present here. And we can see it by condensation here with the E, D sharp E, and all sorts of variations. So, well, that's already proving a much more higher level of harmonic and motivic coherence and conscience. So we can see more of this neighbor tone gesture here and probably at the end. Yeah, those are the places. Whereas the other moments are really scalar. So I think the scales are quite clearly seen as these groups of three notes, right? And the inversion as such is very heavily featured there. So we have these groups of three notes that basically present and explain most of the musical fabric. There is one more element here that's an innovation in comparison to the previous minuets, and is this usage of the hemiola. So the hemiola, it's this sense where we are using a 2/4 instead of 3/4. So in this case, the rhythm is being shifted and we can feel how the downbeat is perceived as 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, which makes this minuet will have some more rhythmic contrast. Right, I can clearly feel that as the hemiola. Right, now let's keep moving forward. So we've explained the beginning that has this D major and B minor, which are basically these two small cadential gestures. And after that we have a sequence. So this is sequential harmony. When this is done like this, generally speaking, we can see a circle of fifths. So let's highlight it. You have here the E that goes to the A, that goes to D, to G, and well, that would go to basically to C sharp. So that's the hidden melody that basically connects this harmonic progression. And it also represents the roots of these chords. So it's not just some random notes that I highlighted that I thought that would, well, be good looking, but they are actually the root chords of the root notes of these chords. So first we have the E minor chord. E minor chord is the second degree in the key of D major. Then we get A, right? So A is the dominant, then D major, and finally we have here G. So these represent the chords of 2, 5, 1, and back to 4, right? Some of them are inverted, so I'll put the inversions here, that's inverted, and also the tonic here, it's inverted. But basically they're E minor, and it's much more elegant to present it like this. Right, and there we also get this suspension, which is the cantus melody, which is the fourth that goes to the third, and then the seventh that resolves to the octave. So that's the leading tone. Right, I'm seeing this fourth from A, and then seventh leading tone, and that would be the suspension. Right, in the second phrase, as you can see, some materials are being reused. So we can clearly see the triplets being present again. So I'll give them the yellow color because they're probably the new rhythm that we haven't seen in the previous minuets. But the phrase starts in D major, and all it does is just a prolongation of the tonic. Now, if you want to make sure that these scales sound good, what you should really look at is the sense of the intervals. So if we pay close attention to each interval that's occurring here, we can clearly see how, well, each of these intervals is it's a consonance, and it's making a lot of sense. We have octave, third, 6, octave, third, 6, which explains why the scale works. Now here also we see the dotted rhythm. The dotted rhythm is also a good element to highlight. So let's give it maybe an orange. So with orange, we'll highlight all of the dotted rhythms. We have one here, we get another there, and here we have it again. So usually dotted rhythms are mostly found in mazurkas or this sort of polonaise in slower dances. So maybe this could be also seen as a little polonaise in that sense. And yeah, the minuet features a bigger variety of rhythms. And now the bass line that you've seen here, so I want to really highlight it. So you see how easy it's to reuse materials. This bass line, which is E, A, A, D, it's the same one that we have here on A. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the same one that we have yet another time here on B. Right, so Elijah is reusing 3 times the same bass line for each of the tonalities. The first time we are hearing it on the key of D major, so it's this 2, 5, 1. Then we're hearing it on the key of A major, so it's again 2, predominant, 5, and 1, and it's in the key of A major. And finally, we're hearing this again as 2, 5, 1, in the key of B minor, which is the tonic, right? So really interesting usage of tonality. As you can see, we've seen more keys. We have B minor, D major, which is the relative major key, right? So that's basically one new key. And here we have the dominant of the relative major. Right, what is happening here in the hemiola passage? Well, we have a condensation that's basically consisting of this dominant to tonic in the key of F sharp minor. F sharp minor is the parallel dominant. So it's the minor dominant of B minor. And after that hemiola, what we can see is, well, a little bit of a circle of fifths that takes us back to E, which is in a way a good point of return for going back to B. So we have F sharp that basically moves to B, and then we have E. So that would be the circle of fifths that kind of connects this progression. We first have the parallel dominant, dominant tonic, then we have the fourth degree, and that fourth degree of F sharp minor is already the tonic of F sharp minor is tonic of B minor. And with that, all we have is just a tonic that goes to the fourth degree, and from there we're having the cadence, which has the 2-5-1. Right, so that's the cadential gesture that I will highlight here and also here. Good. So that would be the minuet, right? I'll play it again now that we have the analysis on the screen. All right, now we're moving forward. So we have the next minuet, which is in D major. I believe that that's the same key as the first minuet. So let's look at this minuet. First, I'll play it, and then we'll just make our comments on, well, what are the structural innovations and the different techniques that were used here. All right, so I think this is quite similar in nature to the minuet that we were seeing in the previous minuet, maybe number 2, because it's a period, right? So let's highlight the periodic nature of it. We have this repetition, and then we get to have that contrasting and closing ideas. So this would be a period. It's a modulating period that starts in tonic and travels to the dominant key. Right, so let's see harmonically what happens. Here we have the perfect cadence in A major. Right, so that's going to be the dominant and tonic of A major. And basically that dominant is prolongated from previously. I think we already can see it here. So all of that would be A major already. Whereas this is the prolongation of the tonic. That's basically featured here, a subdominant or predominant that goes to the dominant key here. And after that we have the tonic. So all of that can be seen as a prolongation of the tonic. So we have D, right, basically in D. After that we go to E, and we're on A. D, E, A, right, that's the tonal plan if you want to travel to the dominant. Now, in the second half we have sequences, and I think this is a very good example of these sequences. We haven't seen them in that strict manner in modulatory way previously, so this is a little bit similar to what we've seen. Where did we see that? Here in the second minuet, right, with G major and in minor, but at this time it's going to other keys. So we have on the one hand the dominant and tonic of E major. So E major is the dominant of the dominant if we're in the key of D major. Right, so we're basically traveling to the dominant of the dominant. And then we have F sharp minor, which is the mediant. So it's the minor mediant, which in this case also can be seen, if you want, as a parallel minor of the relative key. Right, that can be seen a little bit as an obscure concept, but if you go to the relative key, it's B minor, the dominant is F sharp major, the minor parallel key of F sharp major is F sharp minor, and that's what we have there. Now after this, there's yet another repetition. It's much looser, but it's featuring clearly the dominant and the tonic. And this time, if we had first E major, then F sharp minor, the next one is G major. So G major is the predominant that basically is used to arrive to the dominant and tonic at the end. So notice how cadences are usually reused. So the way that we see the ending of this part, put it with this blue. So that ending is exactly the same as this one. They're basically identical, and that helps to give a lot of coherence. Now, in this piece, the remarkable element probably is that basically, instead of having here something blue, I would say we have 3 times, and this is another form, the same material, and then we have a contrasting idea. And that concept is also featured in the second half, where we have this sort of 3 times repetition, and then we have a contrasting idea. So if we can look closer into this, we see a complementarity of the melodic profiles. The first part has these descending scales, right? We have, they're all descending. Whereas in the second half, we have the ascending patterns, which move upwards like that, right? So that's a very good example of structural contrary motion, right? So this is an inversion of section A. And apart from that, I think that it's quite remarkable that the parallel harmony that we have here, it's quite strong. We have a lot of parallel motion, but we also get these moments of contrary motion that's very effective. So here we have good examples of these, right, which are examples of contrary motion. And generally speaking, the piece is a balance or a little dance between parallel motion and contrary motion. Good. So seeing this, now let's kind of highlight maybe the motifs with some colors. So we can use the descending scale. We can give it maybe this green. We can see how that's present all across this part. Then the other element, it's clearly these slower notes that move up. So it's this blue, and it's featured in all of these different places. And here we have it again. And apart from that, we have the neighbor tone, which is the other element. So I can put it here with the pink. Here is the neighbor tone, neighbor tone, neighbor tone. That could be a variation of the neighbor tone. And yeah, basically what we're left with is maybe smaller connectors. So you have definitely these scales. I've missed that one, but I think that could be closer to the green motif, both of this and the bottom one, because after all, they are consisting of this descending closing idea. So we have these closing motifs. Good. And well, that would be pretty much it. So now, well, something that I would like to highlight in this one is also the carefulness that we can see in the second half that features this melody that's kind of moving in range and getting us from F sharp up to D. So that's a very beautiful melody. And that creates a little bit of this sense of culmination, which is creating this small climactic point, right? So that's quite remarkable. And after that, what we have is a descending motion that basically takes us back to the tonic down there. And in the first half, what we have is more or less a neighbor tone, because we have A that moves to B and back to A. So that's pretty much what happens. And once you do the neighbor tone, you have the descending scale that takes you down an octave. All right, now I'm playing Minuet number 4, and we're moving forward. All right, that would be it. Now we're moving to the Minuet number 5. It's again a slower one and in a minor key. I think it's also a nice minuet that already starts to show a little bit more of a development in the compositional style, but the last one is the one that kind of features a slightly more distinct language. So let's play Minuet number 5, and then I'll be analyzing and explaining the different techniques. right? So it's more sophisticated. Definitely, it features more techniques. And one of the things that we see right from the beginning, it's the hemiola. So if we look at this, we can clearly try to think of this as a 2/4, right? So we have this hemiola. And harmonically, we have more chords. So this is tonic that moves to the 4th degree, well, the 6th degree, sorry, that goes to the 2nd, and then the dominant that then through the suspension resolves to the tonic inverted. So that's pretty much what's happening here. And in a way, after that's been done, what we see is sequences. So it's a sequential passage where you have a modal or a reference that's basically repeated. You have a repetition a second lower. That repetition is happening right there, a second below. Right, what is happening here in the modal? It's a dominant tonic and dominant and tonic of 2 different keys. So the first one is the modal, and it's in the key of D minor. D minor is the subdominant. And then once we lower D minor a second down, we get C major, which is the mediant or the relative major. Now, when that is done, basically you start to see a circle of fifths, because it's D, A, D, G, C. And well, the circle of fifths continues and basically takes us to the final destination, which is the key of E minor, right? So this is a modulating sentence. It starts on the key of A minor, and the modulating sentence ends on the dominant. On sentence from minor tonic to minor dominant, right? These are minor keys. If you remember the first minuet that we had in a minor key, which was Elijah's 3rd minuet, didn't go to the minor key or minor dominant, it went to the relative major, right? So we had this cadence in D major. But in this one, Elijah wanted to explore the modulation to the minor dominant, and it's also done with this very attractive echoing effect. So we have this presentation of this melody, and after that we have it again as an echo, which is sounding a little bit lighter and gentler here. So that's an echoing effect, and it's achieved through what we can call an interrupted cadence. You have the predominant, we get the dominant key, and that goes to the 6th degree. So that's the broken cadence, or it's an interrupted cadence. And then that same cadential gesture is being repeated with a predominant, dominant, and tonic, and it goes to a perfect authentic cadence, right, in E minor. So that's basically the difference. Now, once that's done, again, you have 2 options of looking into this. You have the connector back to A minor, which basically transforms E minor into E dominant 7th or E major. And then this one is the cadence into E minor. So that one basically stays on the tonic. And this is a very strong point, because usually you wouldn't feature this sort of broken cadence in the middle, but here it kind of gives a lot of musical logic and coherence, and it's kind of an unexpected point of musical tension, right? So motivically also this is more elaborate, because if you look into it, you can start seeing all sorts of techniques. The first one is that we have still the famous motif of the 3 notes, right? It's basically featured here, but we also get to see another motif, which is this motif of the 2nd that basically moves down, then jumps a 3rd down, and then moves a 2nd up. And it's also featured here. So it's a little bit of this canon, right, between these parts. Now, the purple motif is also featured here, We have it there. We have here the 3 notes. We can see 3 notes in many different places, and also in the connector that's basically moving up. But also at the beginning, we have another ingredient, which is the arpeggio. So that arpeggio has now structural meaning, and it's presented right at the beginning, and we only get to see it there and at the beginning of these points. So it has like, it marks the 3 points of the piece. We have the exposition, we have a development section, and then we have this recapitulation that we'll see here. So that's basically what's occurring there. Right, also I want to mention that's very commendable, this presence of silence in the left hand, because that pause is a good example of, well, a silence after a culmination. So it's kind of silence for release of tension, and at the same time it lets the melody sing a little bit more, because the melody has no accompaniment there. It's a little bit similar to the sort of silence you get at the end. It lets the bass sing, right? So when we hear that ending silence, we also get more presence for singing in the bass line. So here's the bass line sings. All right, now let's look at the development. In the development, basically there is a harmonic progression that's taking us from one key to another. We have first the predominant, the dominant, and the tonic of D major. That's the D major key. And then we have the same process, predominant, dominant, and tonic of A major. Right, A major and D major are really bold choices, because really the minuet was in a minor key. So you would expect more to see D minor and A minor. But here we have the parallel or major parallel subdominant, and then we have the parallel tonic. So these are really strong choices that give a contrast. And as you can see, the piece actually doesn't end in A minor. We end on A major. So this is kind of an extended version of what we can call a Picardy third extended into a Picardy section or a recapitulation. And with this change of mode, basically we can see how well the similar material, it's not the same, it's different, works in different keys. So basically the motif, the purple motif of the 3 notes, I think it's very prominent. We can see it here. Right, so it's all of that. And also we can see the scalar motion there in all sorts of ways. And then the other motif of the arpeggio, I think also we can see it here being featured in a very prominent way. So that's pretty much what's happening. Now, in terms of the harmonic context at the end, we get to have the tonic, the predominant, or in this case it's subdominant, and dominant, which goes basically to an extension of that dominant and eventually a tonic. So we have this parallel motion in thirds. And in a way, when this was written, Elijah's intention with presenting this piece, as I can recall, was to create a piece that featured a sort of recapitulation of all of the different techniques that he was doing previously. Probably he didn't introduce here the triplets, which we missed, but you can see how he is doing the dotted rhythms that were present in other minuets. You have these cadential gestures, and well, in a way, the innovation also shows that we see more specific idiomatic elements, like for instance the trills. Trills were not featured in previous minuets, so this is probably, well, like the more advanced form. Probably for the dotted rhythm I'll put a different color, because it's clearly like a new motif and it stands with its personal characteristics out of the motif of the third. So here we have that dotted rhythm. Very good. And for the echo I'll use maybe the same darker hue of green. All right, let me fix this. There we go. And that's fine. Good. All right, so that will be it. I'll be playing it now that we, well, have analyzed it. I think it's quite a lovely minuet that features some more sophisticated techniques. So let's start. Right, now as I've played it, I've noticed that, well, I didn't highlight enough the blue motif, so we can probably do a little bit of that before we do the overview. So I'll put it back to this hue. So this motif is basically then interrupted or fragmented into just this little cell. And if we look into that cell, I think you can see it in more places. We can see it here. We can see it there inverted. We can also see it in the bass, right? So it's much more prominent now that I'm playing it and looking into it. So there is definitely this singular element that connects motivically the different parts. And now, yes, I think, well, without further ado, I'll start playing it. So those will be the most prominent places, I believe. Good. All right, very nice. So two little details, like this statement on the forte probably should be perceived as the climactic point of the piece, because you have this really strong statement in the major change of mode. And here we have a modal interchange or exchange, because the F is a flat 6 degree, right? Which should be sharp. And here we have this more romantic version, right? Which kind of features that flat 6 degree. All right, and with all of this, we're now arriving to the most personal and most unique minuet of all, which is this last one, which is the Adagio, Minuet number 6 in A major. Quite expressive. So I'll first play it, and after that, we'll get to analyze it. Needless to say that I believe that this is the most mature of all of the minuets and also the most innovative and romantic sounding, more modern sounding. And well, clearly, well, Elijah shows here a more personal and refined style that I think could be closer maybe to the language that you would see in Schumann, in these early romantic composers, rather than maybe a traditional minuet by Bach or Petzold or all of the 18th century tradition. So the first thing we'll do is, well, just analyze it as usual. So we have the A major, and here we have the F sharp minor. So that's already a movement from the major key to the relative. That's something we haven't seen. So we start on the major key and we modulate. There's a modulation to relative minor, right? In all of the previous minuets, when we were having a major key, the modulation was happening to the dominant key, or we were just staying on the same tonic. So this is like a quite new change. It's a more romantic relationship because you have a mediant relationship between the keys. Relationship, right? Now, the melody as such, it's much more expressive. You can see from the very beginning, well, this distinct nature that doesn't sound Baroque at all, and is this motif. And it's also featured in a much more sophisticated manner with imitations across different voices, because you can see it there in the left hand, here it's in the right. So in a way, well, the motif is much more further developed. And in the second half, we don't have a restatement of that, which is also normal. So not always we should have a restatement of it. But we do feature a 4-part writing, which is quite unique, 4-part writing. It's not very complicated in terms of the layout, but we have standing on the dominant. Standing on the dominant, which consists of prolongation of the dominant function before it resolves to the tonic. So we have basically this extended feeling of the tonic. Also, you can notice how the bass is very carefully crafted. So you have just A, G sharp, F sharp, and E, which is a descending motion, and that's basically taking the melody down from the tonic to the dominant. And once you arrive there to the dominant, basically all we see is standing on that dominant. E has been remaining a still note, and after that we have the tonic. In the first half, the bass is much more melodic, and really all of the intervals that we can see is a lot of invertible counterpoint, which consists of parallel sixths and thirds, right? What makes it so romantic is the lack of that perfect cadence at the beginning, but rather a movement to the 6th degree. So from the A major tonic, we move to the 6th degree, and after we hear the 6th degree, we don't hear the perfect cadence yet, but we have the 2nd degree going to the dominant. So in a way, that's a very extended and prolongated way of doing a circle of fifths. You have F sharp going to B, B going to E, and E eventually goes to A, right? And after this is done, needless to say, one of the most remarkable passages in the piece happens, which is this fermata. So I'll give it some special color. Let's put it green. So this is a fermata interrupted cadence. And it's quite similar to the concept or technique we saw in the previous minuet. So we had this broken or interrupted cadence. Let's see it. So we're in the key of F sharp minor, right? So in the key of F sharp minor, that would be the 6th degree, and that's exactly what's happening here. And prior to that, you have the dominant being established, right? And this is done with this suspension, double appoggiatura, which creates a lot of tension. So we're having, on the one hand, the 4th that goes to the 3rd, which we saw in previous pieces, and the 7th that goes up to the octave. And that creates this broken cadence. Sounds very romantic. And after that, all we have just a cadential 6/4. So it's the dominant with the first inversion, second inversion, this, then dominant seventh, and eventually tonic. Right from the beginning also, the way that this is notated and also felt, it's more like a continuous hemiola. So if you look into the time signature, you could be misled. Well, the slurs, I think, are quite clear in this sense, but they are providing this sense of hemiola. And really the time signature is basically reset here at the end. So it's a very much prolongated hemiola that creates a much more unstable feeling, whereas you can see the harmony are falling on the downbeat, but the material is being shifted and moved across rhythmically with these hemiolas. Also, we have this parenthesis, but probably this motif deserves its own special color. So let's give it blue. We have this arpeggio. So the arpeggio is being reused in all of these different places, and it gives a much more interesting and also expressive character. So it increases the expression. You have this, a more expressive, romantic feel, I would say, romantic feel of the piano, where you have the entire chord being extended. This passage sounds a lot like maybe a piece by Schumann. Right, and there is this imitation still. The motif of the three notes is very present all across these minuets, so you can see it as well here, right? If we want to see the motif initially, it's present there, but also you can see it there as a little canon, right? So that would be the motif of the three notes. Probably I'll be missing a lot of them because the musical fabric is really organized around these three note motifs. And well, here we can see them more prominently, I guess, right? Here and there, it's the scale that's answering. So those are all three note motifs. And the other motif that we were having is the neighbor tone, right? So even here, that's parallel 6. Parallel 6 with the third motif. But mostly, I mean, if you look into this texture, the top line is also descending progression. So we have F going to E, going to D, going to C sharp. So it's a very descending progression. All right, so that would be pretty much in the first half. In the second half, this, which is basically a set of parallel 6. Parallel 6. It also can be viewed as a harmony that has a seventh. Right, as a circle of fifths. So let's try to highlight the circle of fifths here so we get to see it more clearly. I'll do a red line for it. So we have here the A that goes to the D, the G sharp that goes to the C, the F sharp that goes to the B, the E that goes to eventually A, which is at the end, right? So that's the point of ending. All right, so that's kind of how this is structured, and it's all based around these parallel 6. And the parallel 6, in a way, resemble also the melodic motion of the descending 6 that's presented at the beginning. So the melodic motion becomes eventually also harmonic. For that, I would like to really highlight with some color all of the parallel 6 that are melodic. So let's do it with orange. That's a melodic parallel 6. That's another parallel 6. Here we have more of them. And here they're also in the bass featured there. So we might be missing some, but I'll try to get as many as we can. Here in the second half, I don't see that many, but if you want to, you can technically call these parallel 6 as melodic because they're not sounding at the same time. So here we have this, which is also like a melodic parallel 6. but not much that I can see beyond that. So having said this, these roots that I'm showing here are real chords. So we have A major 7th chord going to the D, and really the D becomes with the B a new chord, which is B minor, but that leads us to, right? So technically you could start seeing the D major from here. That's the D major, right? So I'll put it on the left maybe. Now this would be the G sharp minor 7th flat 5, or what we call a half diminished, G sharp half diminished, going to C sharp minor, right? And C sharp minor eventually becomes A major. So that's the trick. We had it also here. So that's B minor. And here, this is changing to A major, just moving a third down, right? So that's what we have there. And now we get to here F sharp minor 7th, going to B minor. And that B minor becomes G sharp diminished. And if we go lower, we get to have E, which I will just stay there on D because, well, that's the main key. So if I connect these, probably with an orange, you can see A, G sharp, F sharp, E. That's exactly what those main roots. We can see how they're moving down. Right, like that. Right? And this is a very good example of how to do a sequence. When you have to do 4 repetitions of the same, it's always better to group it into pairs of 2. And here the grouping is achieved through 2 techniques. One of the techniques is having the blue thing that I've showed there, but also it's this melodic variation. So without the melodic variation, everything would sound much more repetitive. So that's the modal. And this is the repetition second lower. So I'll do it without the melodic variation. Right, sounds like this. It could still work, but it's much more repetitive. That's more interesting. And then we have a contrasting idea, which is this arpeggio. Right. So in both cases, I mean, these are sentences. That's also worth, well, they're not sentences. So the first one is a period, sorry. This is a period, modulating to the parallel, to the relative minor. So we have that parallel period. I'll put it with the red so we can see the opening idea. This is the opening idea, which basically represents that. And then we get to have the contrasting idea and closing ideas. So I'll put those with blue. Whereas in the second half, we see an example of a sentence. So this is a non-modulating sentence, which consists of A measures, and well, basically it starts on the opening idea, it repeats it afterwards, we have that repetition, and then we have the contrasting idea that goes basically till the end and it closes the piece. So that'll be it. I'll play it once more before closing this set. right, so this is it. I hope you enjoyed it, found it useful. These are the 6 minuets by Elijah, which will represent basically this evolution also in the musical style within a very specific genre. It's a 16-bar minuet. I really hope that this also inspires you to write minuets in this style, and also within this limitation of the 16 measures miniature, try to explore something new. I think that Elijah has successfully achieved something very personal and unique. In the last minuet, in all of these minuets, we can see an evolution in different techniques from the Baroque and period composition. So without further ado, I'd like to thank you all for watching the video. The best way to support the channel is through Patreon, where you can find different materials. I would really encourage you to check out the different ways that you have also for studying with me. You can do that through group lessons, individual lessons, also receiving feedback on your own compositions. So I hope to see you in the next video next week, and I'm wishing you all a happy week of composition. And today's week we have the music of Elijah Diaz. Take care. Bye bye.